a lady reached out to me recently and said, hey, this person set up this business entity for me. Come to find out that where the person set up the business entity, they actually made that person the owner of the business, and then this gal was the manager. So she actually didn't have any ownership in the business.
Welcome to How to Real Estate Podcast, a podcast that will help you start, elevate, and catapult your real estate investing career. Jared tested, Jana approved. Hi guys, hi, welcome to How to Real Estate. This is Jared.
This is Jana.
And today I'm so stoked about this guest, guys. Like, you have no idea. So this guest, I've worked with him. He's helped me out with quite a few of my deals. This guy is the man. So this guest, he's been in business and real estate attorney who's worked with almost exclusively with real estate investors for almost 5 years. He's helping them with every type of real estate and business strategy, from business planning to creative acquisition strategies to tax planning and exits. So this guest is an entrepreneur, a real estate investor as well. He understands the challenges and opportunities of being a real estate investor. Cody has created over 400 business entities and closed hundreds of real estate transactions. He has been in and around real estate development, construction, management his whole life. He has been involved in the management of $200 million portfolio of commercial real estate and works with clients from every level, from gurus. This guest enjoys working with entrepreneurs and real estate investors. Cody Backus is our guest, and we're so happy to have him on. I mean, he's a real estate attorney, he's an investor, and I think it's really important there's so many different options of people you can work with. And so when you have lenders and attorneys, when they're also investing in real estate, it makes it so much better when they speak the same language and they can kind of help you along the way. It's phenomenal. So Cody Backus, thank you for coming on, man. We're so excited to have you on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys. It's honor to be here and to be able to share hopefully some valuable nuggets. And we were talking kind of about how there's opportunities to keep you in the safe zone, right? So protect everybody in the world of real estate investing and do it safely at the end of the day. So that's kind of the goal here. Is the attorneys are kind of known to be normally people that stop transactions or stop deals because they're so protective. And as an entrepreneur, as a real estate investor, it's an interesting balance to say more often than not like you can't do that, but how can you do that and be able to provide, the protective side of things, but also to try to find ways to get the deals done. And I like that challenge. So thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And we have Cody on. He's an attorney. But, he's going to give us a lot of general ideas, so I want you guys to take it with a grain of salt. And if you're going to implement anything that you hear about on this podcast or any of our other podcasts, make sure that you consult your local professional, you consult your local lawyer before you jump into anything. These are just going to give you ideas of basic understandings. Hopefully that covered our bases there, Cody.
You did good. Yeah. It doesn't constitute legal advice. So you definitely want to, your particular transactions may be different. So we'll talk about some cool things today, but I always recommend you reach out to an attorney. And that's one thing that I'll share kind of up front for a lot of people is I feel sometimes, and one of my goals as an attorney is to be approachable. And I remember, when I was an entrepreneur and well before I became an attorney, that I felt maybe intimidated or reluctant to call an attorney. So my first business, I actually learned to wash windows and set up a business with two other buddies, and we created a window cleaning company. And at one point, I wanted to sell that company. I'd built it up, and it had value, and I wanted to go do something else. And I had the thought of reaching out to an attorney to help with that transaction and transition, but I didn't. And I ended up trying to sell the business without the help of an attorney, and basically totally flopped. He crushed the business. The guy that was buying from me ended up tanking the business. I never got paid $1. I went back in later, like 6 months later, tried to rescue a bunch of clients. And knowing what I know now, as an attorney, I could have helped my younger self then to actually have been paid what I was owed in that transaction. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to share and convey is people think that attorneys are expensive, and sometimes they can be, but man, every day I have an opportunity to help somebody, make more money or protect themselves from really stepping into a big pile of a mess. And And I think most people don't know what the hazards are. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And I'm not just saying that to try to pitch, services, but to say, hey, like there's a lot of transactions that could really go bad. And having somebody who has that experience, I think at least is worth their weight in gold. Like an attorney should charge you way less than what they're going to save you or protect you from. And so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out. And you might have a dumb question. Most consults with attorneys are free. So it's like, if you call an attorney and have questions and they want to do a quick consult, they might not be able to give you legal advice, but they'll be able to tell you if it's worth paying for or not. So people call me and I say, hey, you don't really need me. Like, here's how to go do that without my services, or you don't need an attorney, or yeah, this is a significant deal, and I'm going to help you either save a bunch of money or protect yourself through this. So.
Oh yeah, it's. I think one of my mentors, Mitch Nelson, he said, and I'm sure he pulled it from somewhere else too. But if you think it's expensive to work with professionals, it's even more expensive if you don't work with professionals. I mean, it's just the money that can be saved is dramatically pretty big.
Yeah, no, for sure. And my first piece of advice, is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out and call the attorneys and reach out and find somebody that can help out. We don't eat people. I don't eat people, I promise.
Well, when I first started out, I had a conversation with you, Cody, over the phone. And I remember one thing that really stuck with me is like, okay, so I'm told I need to get an LLC. So what do I got to do? And you're like, you know what? At your level, you don't need it right now. Don't worry about it. And so it's like, this attorney said he doesn't want my money, and so like, but it made me feel good because you're actually, looking out for my best interest. You know what I mean? So I thought, this is really cool. This is good.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jack.
I'm not a very good salesman a lot of times. I talk people out of my services about as often as I talk them into it. And people always kind of give me that, like, this is weird. You're telling me like to not hire you. And at the end of the day, like, I sleep better. My wife might wish that I made a little bit more money, but if I sleep better, and it comes back, people know that I'm being straightforward with them. And then when they really do need it, I'll be honest with them. And that's kind of the way I operate. Sorry, Jana, you had a question.
No, I was just going to say, like, as a new investor starting out and they don't have the money or an attorney that they have on retainer, how do they reach out, or how does that work? Like, let's say you're just starting out and you've already done your consult with an attorney, your free consult for whatever reason, but now you have a question on a transaction. Is that like something that you just bill per phone call, or how do attorneys usually set that up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, and I operate, in some ways I operate like a lot of other attorneys. In some ways I operate a little bit differently. So, sometimes there are clients that have a lot of questions, and those questions aren't all at once, but they're like spread out over time. And that client might realize, like, I just want to have somebody that I can call and get those questions as I work through deals. And so I would have, $1,000 or $1,500 that I would take in a retainer, kind of in a deposit up front. And then I would just bill either emails or phone calls. And it's based on like every 6-minute increments. So I'm watching my clock, every 6 minutes, what I'm doing on behalf of the client. And then I bill them 1/10 of my hourly rate. And that's how a lot of attorneys work. They bill off an hourly rate and off a retainer. So client puts, $1,500 into a trust account with my firm. And then as they have questions and they work through those transactions, and that's kind of for somebody who like recognizes they're serious about real estate investing, but they're going to have ongoing kind of need consulting. So I do that pretty often. If it's just like a one-time question, that's kind of hard, because really at that point I'm giving legal advice, but you're not really a client yet. And so I have in the past done like just a single, 15-minute or 20-minute consult, a paid consult, because I'm giving legal advice, and just for like a single question. And then otherwise, when somebody calls me, if they call me and they need a specific, like, we have a contract, will you review this contract? Or we have a need to set up a business entity, or can you help us with a particular real estate transaction? Wherever possible, I can usually give them a flat fee quote or a really close ballpark to what it's going to cost up front, so that they would know right up front, like, this is how much that's going to cost you. And then you could kind of maybe shop it out or have an idea at least up front. I just don't like surprises, and I don't want to surprise my client, and then they don't want to pay a bill because it's a surprise, right? So yeah, certain things are like, I know what we're getting into or how long it's going to take, and so I have kind of a flat fee for those services. if it's just kind of like, hey, we have a bunch of ongoing questions and we want to be able to ping you or email you or call you or even text you when we have those things come up, then you've got to pay the retainer. So that's kind of how the fee structures normally work.
Awesome. Well, that's kind of good, because there's times where you have just a quick questions. That'd probably be me. Just quick questions or texts or emails, and you're like, who can I call right away, real quick? Yeah. So it's good. It's nice to know that you could just have like a prepaid attorney that you can reach out to. Yeah, a prepaid phone call.
And like,
sorry. Oh, sorry. And say like a good idea. Like if you get your first deal, like you do your first wholesale deal or something like that, you know, take $1,000 and put it into attorney fund. Honestly, then you have that ready to go. You know, just good suggestion.
Yeah,
that's a great tip.
And then like, let's say the $1,000 is really like a deposit. So let's say you have a couple phone calls and you're like, hey, I don't have any more questions. I figured this out. You know, then the balance at that point that hasn't been charged or billed against you can just be refunded back to you. So. Or we eat through all the $1,000 and you're like, I still have questions, then you just ante up again, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That means you're doing stuff if you ate through all the $1,000. That's good.
Yeah.
And you can afford to just keep going, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Get more deals.
So I do that like on the real estate consulting side. I mean, and you kind of have the upfront learning curve, and so it's more consistent, or there's more questions up front, but then you kind of level off and you pretty much, you know, have it good for a while until you shift and pick up a new strategy or decide to bring on partners or do something else, right? And then we interact again. But I like those ongoing relationships, and I don't mind working with. This kind of goes back to maybe your audience here, but I work with a lot of entry-level real estate investors, and that's another thing that I think a lot of entry-level people think. Well, their attorneys don't want to work with me because I'm too small or I don't know enough, or I'm going to ask them questions or whatever. And my attitude is that hopefully I can be a means to helping those entry-level people grow, right? And make it to the next level and continue to grow. And then we have a long-term ongoing client relationship. Not everybody has that, you know, they decide to do something else or struggle, but they, if I can be a facilitator along the way, then those will be long-term, you know, good clients and good friends, and be able to develop that relationship over time. So, yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal. Excellent. So a lot of our listeners, they're starting out. Some have been more experienced than others, but a lot of them are just starting out. And so they've been hearing about LLCs, and like, you got to get yourself an LLC. What is an LLC? What does that even mean?
And why does it even matter, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's you know, within the space of real estate, I would say one of the primary, there's really 4 reasons why I encourage people or tell people, you know, to set up an LLC. And as we were talking about beforehand, like these 4 factors or criteria are really helpful in helping somebody determine like when they should set up an LLC and if it applies to them. So a high level is, the first one is you set up an LLC to protect your assets, your personal assets. So if you have a job with good income, or you have equity in your primary residence, or you have a lot of cash in the bank, or you have, you know, those things are all assets that you have personally. And the world of real estate is one of the most litigated areas. The most lawsuits come within the space of construction and ownership, you know, landlord and tenant laws, and those violations. They come in the form of, you know, a lot of things that are connected to real estate, and primarily because there's a lot of insurance behind, you know, our homeowners insurance and construction insurance, that sort of thing. And so there's, you know, those plaintiffs' attorneys that want to go after those dollars. There's a lot of lawsuits around it. So one of the primary reasons that people set up an LLC is because it creates a layer of protection between my activities as a real estate investor and then my assets personally. And we'll get kind of into more of the details if you want to about how that works and the mechanics of it. But so that's one reason, is for asset protection. And another reason that they set up an LLC is for tax planning. And so, you know, hopefully if you're doing well in real estate and you're making money, the type of income that you're making is going to be a factor. But often people are starting to do well, and now they're dealing with paying big tax bills. And so there are some very legal, you know, opportunities to be able to significantly reduce what you have to pay to the IRS by having an LLC in place. So if you want to pay less to the IRS and keep more in your pocket, then an LLC is one very powerful way to do that, and still have a lot of benefits of that money coming to you, but finding different ways to keep it. At the end of the day, you keep more of what you make, basically. Those are the two biggest reasons. Then the other two are significant, but maybe are less tangible. One of those is really creating an LLC. A lot of times creates a lot of credibility. So if you're wholesaling, or if you're flipping houses, and you want to work through a network of people, or you're working with money lenders, or even sellers in that sense, having an LLC in place just kind of makes you look all of a sudden legitimate, right? They see you as being credible and somebody who's taking your business seriously. And so sometimes those things are enough to actually be the difference between actually getting a deal or not getting a deal, or being able to get a lender to loan you money or not getting a lender to loan you money, is just the difference in having an LLC. So sometimes that LLC gives you the credibility or legitimacy. I would say that it's less, maybe not less important, because it could be really significant to you. So that's number 3. And then number 4 is really about privacy. So sometimes you can have an LLC and be able to do some things kind of behind an LLC, and still be able to maintain some privacy components. So some people are just, maybe they don't want to be found so easily in the public space. And this kind of connects to the asset protection side, but it's a little bit different in the sense that an LLC can provide some privacy. So those are kind of, if you feel like, hey, I have assets that I don't want to lose, other rental properties, primary residence, a really good job, like I don't want my wages to be garnished. I don't want my cash in my bank account, or whatever. Those sort of things can become valuable assets that you could lose through your activities as a real estate investor. So, if you don't have that issue, then the next one is, well, do you have a tax issue? Are you making enough money as a real estate investor, or through some other means? Do you have a tax issue? If that's the case, then hey, an LLC could be a solution. If that's not the case, then go to the next one, right? So if none of those apply to you, then you probably don't need an LLC, right? If you don't need credibility or legitimacy, if you don't need to have any privacy, if you just need to go out there and hawk some deals. And I'll tell people that, like, I just assume see somebody do their first couple of deals in their personal name, if they don't have much to lose or risk financially themselves personally, then I'm an entrepreneur probably before I'm an attorney, and I am a huge fan of not putting the cart in front of the horse.
Right.
Right. So let's figure out a way to use that horse first, figure out a way to make money as a real estate investor, do your first deal or 2 deals, prove to yourself that you can do it. And then at that point say, I'm taking this seriously, and now let's go do 10, 20, 100 more deals with a business in place.
Right.
I will say kind of one thing, it's not in a list of 4, but just a cool thing that I've noticed happens is, for a lot of people, the moment of setting up that LLC is almost one of those things psychologically and emotionally that it becomes legitimate and real to them. And sometimes just doing that is enough to propel them past, like, I'm kind of timid and I'm not really sure if I'm going to do this, to it just got real. It just got real to move forward. And so if somebody might be on the fence or kind of a little bit timid, that could be the next thing that propels them into this space. But again, like I said, I talk people out of my services and say, you go figure out a way to do a deal first, because I know there's a lot of attorneys who get paid well before somebody does a deal, and then they that individual just spent a couple $1,000 for legal entities that never get used because they never do a deal. So I'm not a fan of that.
And I think one of the biggest things with new people, especially starting out, they get the analysis paralysis, and part of that is just I have to get they're worried about having everything right. I want the right scripts right. I want this right. I get my LLC right. So removing the LLC, at least from the get-go, to start doing deals, it kind of loosens up the analysis paralysis a little bit, and they just need to focus on talking to people and getting something under contract and working from there. So I think that's a great strategy, and kind of relieves some pressure, especially when people don't understand everything exactly. Like getting an LLC, talking to attorneys seems almost overwhelming at first, let alone talking to a seller and doing everything else. I mean, I think that mindset is really wise for a lot of people, especially starting out.
Point, would you say that, let's say a new investor, he's done a couple deals, he's made maybe $10,000. It's is it time for an LLC? Or when do you think would be a good time? Is it the 2 deals that you would think if you have assets to protect? I mean, you just follow that, or is there an amount that an investor should be making as well to start?
Yeah. So under the second factor, which is like the tax side, that's a little bit easier to put like a dollar amount to it. And so most CPAs and tax professionals will say that the opportunity to start really saving in taxes through an LLC or an S corporation. If you're flipping or wholesaling properties, you're collecting what's called active income or ordinary income under the IRS, and with that type of income, you're going to get hit with ordinary income taxes and self-employment tax at 15.3%. So at that point, you start getting hit with some taxes, but the cost of setting up the business entity and paying payroll and filing additional tax returns is more than you save up until about 30 to 40,000. So $35,000, somewhere right in there within a tax year, calendar year, usually for most people. So if you're only going to make $10,000 in a year and your primary purpose is setting up an LLC for tax savings, then you're actually going to spend more on getting the entity set up and processing those things than you will in tax savings. But maybe the idea is, well, yeah, but it helps me with other things too. Like it helps me with the credibility or the privacy component. So that was the other reasons why I set it up, not solely for the tax savings part, or maybe it provided asset protection along the way. So it can be multiple factors. If it were other than like wholesaling or flipping, or you're setting up for those non-tax purposes, then for me, I would look at it more as a matter of like, because there is administrative cost, there's bookkeeping, there's work associated that, with setting up a business entity. Individuals have to kind of decide, like, I've done enough deals to know that I'm going to continue doing this, and therefore I need these things to set up and go and keep doing this. Or if it's like, I've done 2 or 3 deals, but I never want to touch real estate again, I hate it, then you're kind of glad that you didn't set up the entity. So for me, it's like that internal guide that says, like, I love real estate, I know I'm going to do this for the long term or whatever. That's easier. Another kind of easy thing is, like, for me, most people would say, like, the very second you have your very first rental property, it should go in an LLC. And in a lot of ways, I can see where there is, a valid point to that. But at the same time, if that house that you just bought is like, 90% loan to value, meaning you put like very little equity into it, and then you personally barely have a W-2 job, not making very much, and a couple nickels to rub together in the bank, then even if you were sued, the plaintiff attorney is going to look at that and say, there's nothing there to go after, right? This guy doesn't have anything. Right. So it's kind of like the end of the road, except for the insurance policy. There's no other assets to really worry about there. So for me, once you have a rental property and you either experience enough, either a down payment or appreciation is going up, or, you start to kind of see that transition where it's starting to build up equity. And again, everybody's a little bit different as far as like their level of tolerance for risk. But when you get to the point where, like, I really don't want to risk that equity, or I don't want to risk some of my personal bank account or other assets that I have are building and growing, then I need to start protecting kind of what I have. And then at that point you say, okay, let's go set up the LLC, put the rental property in an LLC, and then we can start to kind of separate these things we have. And then you go through like the whole other question of, I have 3 rental properties now, should they all go in one LLC, or should we start breaking them up into multiples? And right. Those are the kind of conversations that I get into, and really helping clients understand how do we separate and analyze and evaluate what the risk is, what the risk tolerance is, and then how do we create a plan? Because it can be really complicating before too long. Now you have 3 LLCs and 3 bank accounts and 3 tax filings or bookkeeping, tax returns to deal with, and so we have those other factors to kind of calculate.
So I have a question for you. So how does an LLC protect us? I'm gonna run a scenario by you, and okay. I want you to run the scenario run it as if someone has an LLC, and then the same scenario if someone doesn't have an LLC, and what the differences are. Okay, so let's say I have a rental property. Okay, so someone slips and falls, they fall, they break, then they sue me for however much they want. So what happens to the person that has an LLC? What happens to the person that doesn't have an LLC? And what's the difference? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So the person who doesn't have an LLC, the first thing that the plaintiff's attorney will look at is the insurance policy on the house and kind of its limits. And sometimes an insurance policy coverage will cover the damages of what took place, right? So if it was a slip and fall and there's $100,000 in damages and there's a $250,000 policy limit, then no big deal, right? The insurance policy is going to pay out and there's no big deal. But let's say the tenant has a complaint about like discrimination as a landlord because you discriminated against them or you treated them differently because of something, because they had a pet. I mean, right? At that point, your insurance policy doesn't have anything to do with that type of claim, right? And so the lawsuit at that point is going to be against the landlord of the property. And at that point, it's your personal name who's the landlord on the property. So the lawsuit is going to be against you personally. And then at that point, the plaintiff's attorney are determining, hey, what do you have? Do you own other rental properties in your personal name? Do you have bank accounts? Do you have access, what do you have in terms of cash? And if you don't have any of those things, but you have a decent job or a decent income, then they're going to go after wages. I mean, so they're going to go after anything that you have personally that is not satisfied in that case by insurance, right? So that's an example of that scenario. In a scenario where you have an LLC in place, and the LLC is the landlord, meaning it's the one that's on title with the property, then the initial lawsuit is going to be against you. Same thing, they're going to go after insurance policies first. Okay. If insurance policies don't cover it or the damage exceeds the policy limits, then they have to sue the LLC, right? So that's where the LLC creates a barrier. If you set up the LLC the right way, and this is kind of where sometimes there's a lot of confusion, and you might find things you read out there like LLCs don't really provide protection because they can be pierced, it's a corporate veil and they can be pierced and we'll just go after the owners anyways. And that can happen, or it doesn't necessarily have to happen, right? If you run the LLC the right way. We could have a whole nother podcast series on those sort of areas, but if it's set up the right way, then the LLC stands as a barrier between your assets personally and the LLC and its assets. So let's say, for example, that LLC has other rental properties in it and they have equity. Then that equity could be at risk, right? Or those other properties could be at risk of, forced sale or judicial sale and other, things like that, so they can access that money. Or it might have cash in its bank account. But otherwise, if those things can't be satisfied, then that's kind of end of the road for the plaintiff's attorney, right? And so your personal assets are going to be protected from those claims of your tenant against you. And that's where the LLC stands in place. So an LLC stands for a limited liability company. It means that me as the owner of the LLC, I'm limiting my liability or my exposure to risk by using this company. And it stands as a separate legal entity between the business activities that it's involved in and me personally.
Right. Okay. So it's almost like I'm putting a person in front of me and they're the owner of the company.
You're throwing the company under the bus.
Yeah. It's like you have a huge lineman or a linebacker, somebody that you could put up in front of you that's like your bodyguard, right? Yeah, it's exactly. It's a little bit like that. It's like, hey, how can I set up like a really huge dude in front of me and people are going to come after me, but I have a massive giant that stands in front of me that's willing to take out anybody who comes after me. It really is. I mean, it's kind of a fun way to look at it, but that's a way of kind of perceiving the protection that's available through an LLC.
And so if an investor, let's say you're just starting out and you buy a rental, it's your first rental, you put it under your name because you're just starting out, and then you start to pick up more business and you're thinking, man, I really need to put this in an LLC. Is there a way to then transition the LLC that's in my name, or not the LLC, but the property that's in my name? Can I transfer that over under the LLC so that I'm protected?
Sure, yeah. So the same document that was used to transfer the property from the previous owners over to you was called a warranty deed, and there's a couple different versions, a quick claim deed, or in a normal sale, it's called a warranty deed. So they transfer that property over to you. Well, you could just sign a warranty deed from you over to the LLC. Right now, the LLC becomes the owner, and it needs to be recorded, obviously, with the county so that it's actually officially, controlled there. And at that point, the LLC becomes the new owner. The other thing that you want to do is then change if you have a lease agreement with the tenant. This is where some people actually miss this part, right? So it's like, hey, we got the property transferred over to the LLC, but I still have a lease agreement with the tenant with me individually as a landlord. Right, so we do both things, right? We transfer the property over to the LLC so that it's the landlord, but then I need to amend my lease agreement with my tenant that has the LLC listed as the new landlord. Again, because I want to separate myself, I need to give myself some distance and let the LLC be the landlord. I'm the manager of the LLC, so I'm still signing a lease agreement as the manager of the LLC, but now from a contractual standpoint, it's also the landlord. So the agreement contractually is between the landlord and the tenant, which is my LLC, and making sure that I get removed. And that's where some people kind of miss that step. They transfer, or they might change they think that changing the lease agreement without transferring the property over to the LLC is enough to give them the protection. So it really needs to be both moved over. And the last question, even though you didn't ask it, but one of the things gets asked a lot in doing that is, what about a provision in the loan that I have with my lender that says I transfer the property from myself to somebody else, the lender can call the note due, right? It's a due on sale clause within the loan documents, and almost every loan has a due on sale clause. And so the answer to that question technically is, does it violate the due on sale clause? Yes. Does that type of transaction and transfer take place all over the country every day in the tens of thousands? Yes. The number of banks that are calling those notes due under those transfers is very, 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 very small. And so in most cases where there is that transfer over, the first thing a bank does is notify you and says, hey, you can't do that. And you say, mea culpa, right? I'm sorry. I'll transfer it back. I was trying to do it to protect your asset, Mr. Bank owner, right? So that I don't get a lawsuit. So I'll transfer it back and put it in my name. So they're really not normally calling the bank loan due. If you, as a matter of curiosity, the only time that would happen, right now we're at 3% or lower even interest rates. Let's say we go from 3% to 18%, right? In that scenario, banks are probably more inclined to start calling notes due, because they can then get the property and then sell it to somebody else at a much higher interest rate than what you had at 3%. So we have to have major economic changes. For banks are not in the business of owning real estate; they just want a loan against it, right? So not really an issue. That's a question that comes up. A lot of people can I transfer this property over to the LLC that I own? Does it violate the due on sale? So.
On that do not sell or due on sell clause, is there a time frame? So after, let's say they transferred on in March, is there a time frame where they can still call the note due after a while, or after a while they're well, they've been receiving payments? Is there?
Yeah, every loan agreement that I've seen, they don't ever have a time period. So, if you have a 30-year loan and it's on year 29 and 11 months, and you decide to transfer it, I suppose the bank could still call it due. I mean, you only have one more payment at that point left, but so there really isn't a transfer restriction in that sense. I do have one other tip though. I just thought of.
Please.
This is a really big one actually. So if you buy a property and you might transfer it into an LLC, you paid title insurance when you bought the property, and the title insurance really insured you as the individual buying the property. And that insurance policy is good as it relates to claims against title to you. Sometimes in the transfer of that real property over to the LLC, most title insurance policies are violated, meaning if you did have a claim come against you, a title claim, they would kind of raise their hands. Insurance companies are looking for any opportunity to say, hey, we don't have to pay out, right?
Right.
And so the tip is this: when you buy a property and you think it might be later transferred into a rental property, and that happens, most people are buying properties, even if you've been an investor for years, and you have to buy it and get credit in your personal name, and then you plan to transfer it. you need to ask for an endorsement. An endorsement is an additional kind of piece of information that you add to your title insurance policy that allows you to transfer it over to an LLC, and it won't violate your title insurance policy. So to say, hey, you can tell your title company, hey, I plan to transfer this property over to an LLC at some point in the future. I don't want it to avoid my $1,200 policy that I just paid for. Can you add or include an endorsement to make sure it doesn't do that? And title will make sure that happens. You might pay a little bit for it, but it's worth it.
So when you do transfer title from your personal name to an LLC and you don't have an endorsement added to title, you have to pay that $1,200 or whatever the price is for title insurance again?
You don't have to pay for the title insurance, like the whole entire premium again. You might just have to pay to add that endorsement on there. And frankly, really probably hundreds of thousands of properties have just been transferred into the LLC and they never go back to add the title endorsement. They just know, like, if there's a title insurance claim, there's a risk you might be stuck without that insurance covering you. But if you know going into it, and now all of your listeners know, add that to it, and then you're always good.
Yeah. So with LLCs, I mean, having a long-term hold, it's a really good idea to have an LLC holding the property. What about a flip? Do you think it's a good idea to buy a property and you just want a short-term hold, like 3 to 6 months? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so you definitely want to have a property again in an LLC in that case for a couple reasons. One is in a flip, there's a lot of probability or possibility for injury risk. People are getting in and showing it. People are doing construction on it. People are, walking around it more frequently because it is, a flip, or there's contractors there. And so there's that risk, right? So again, if you have assets or you have things you're concerned about, the probability of a lawsuit in that scenario goes up. The other reason is, depending on if this is your first flip, this might not be an issue. But if in that flip you make 35 grand, then immediately you're starting to get really close to having to deal with tax issues right away. And if you're going to do 2 of those in a year, then it's better that the income was, the income and the expenses was handled through the LLC, so that all of that becomes expenses and income and taxable deductions at the end of the year through the LLC as well. So so in that case, if it was only 1 flip in the year and it was only $10,000, then we probably don't start to get into like the tax advantage side of an LLC, but we still have maybe the asset protection side. Again, I guess the answer is, if you don't have more than 2 nickels to rub together, it's your very first flip, and you're only going to make 5 grand on it, then going through the cost of setting up an LLC and managing all of it would probably be outweighed by the benefits. This is the analysis that I get to run through with every different scenario and question that clients ask. But I love it. It's really great for your listeners to kind of hear that analysis and dialogue to be able to determine where they're at along the way.
What about wholesaling? So if someone's just burning through contracts, is it even worth it even to put the contract under the LLC's name and just transfer it over, or what do you think about that?
So again, you're going to run into, there's not as much liability in a wholesale deal because you never actually own title and you never actually turn a shovel, right? So the liability or risk side is lower there for sure. Any kind of risk in terms of violation or breach of contract is going to be really dealt with through the earnest money deposits. So we don't have that to worry about. So really, it's at that point becomes more, we start to shift from the asset protection side over to the tax planning bucket, which is, okay, am I doing enough wholesale deals in a year that I'm going to have a tax issue? So at that point, hey, I need to be doing this for dealing with taxes. At the same time, sometimes, I've set up tons of entities for wholesalers, and if they use the right kind of branding in any, setting up an entity that has to do with, real estate solutions or whatever. Don't use the word investor, by the way, if you want to be a wholesaler and work directly with sellers, because they probably immediately think that you're going to be able to take advantage of them, as another just tip. Right. So setting up or choosing a business name, if you're going to be working directly with distressed sellers, is really creating a brand and being able to use that brand in an LLC to communicate a message about being able to solve problems. Your business, Jared, right, was something solutions
for
wholesaling. Challenge solver, yeah. So it had to do with, I knew that it had connected, right? So it kind of shared that message. So you can use a business entity for the branding, and that's where I was going back to, the credibility or legitimacy sometimes in using an entity for that purpose is in your marketing, right, to be able to solve those problems. But the tax issue is probably going to be as like you said, if they're burning through contracts and they're doing quite a few deals, they're going to get to that $35,000 mark pretty quickly, and all of a sudden they have a tax problem.
Makes sense. Gotcha. Beautiful. What's the benefit of going off and setting up a LLC with attorney as opposed to just trying to do it yourself? Like, what is some of because attorneys cost more, but what's the pros and cons?
Yeah, you can just go to LegalZoom, right? Yeah, and just do it there.
Sure. Yeah. No. I think at the end of the day, you have to understand, at least where I'm coming from, is you get what you pay for. And that's probably harder to perceive in terms of value when you don't know. So it doesn't seem like you're getting that much. Like I was thinking recently, we just bought a house and closed and had a guy come in and actually remodel the kitchen. And it was very obvious to me what I paid for, right? Because this whole entire kitchen looks completely different now. Cabinets are painted, backsplash, lighting, all this stuff got done. And it was very obvious what I paid for. And I thought about that from my client's perspective. And I think sometimes when we're done, they get a binder mailed to them, or sometimes just an email with some documents. And it's like, really? I paid that much money for that? You kind of don't know what you got, right? It doesn't feel like what you paid for. But at the end of the day, and a lot of times it's doing it right. So you could do it. And if you know what you're doing, then setting it up yourself could be okay. Honestly, I have clients that have done it long enough. They have the experience and they could probably go in and know how to set it up right. But I have countless stories of people that come to me and have did it themselves or thought so 3 examples. Recently, I started working with a guy and he had set up a bank account and had an EIN number, tax ID number, and was operational, but he said he had questions about his legal entity. So he called me and I started digging into it, and I was kind of probing him to dig into it, only to find out that he started the process of creating the legal entity and never actually finished it. So the state had no record of this entity ever existing. Right? So if he was ever in a lawsuit, the entity doesn't even exist. He would have been sued personally. So for probably almost a year, he operated thinking he had a business in place, but he did it himself and just had no idea. And so that was one example. Another example was a lady reached out to me recently and said, hey, this person set up this business entity for me, but I have some questions about it. Will you look into it? And come to find out that where the person set up the business entity, they actually made that person the owner of the business, and then this gal was the manager. So she actually didn't have any ownership in the business. So she's doing all this work to make all this money, and she's not even an owner. That's a problem. That's kind of a big deal, right? Other things, just in terms of how they get structured, like I have people all the time that will call me and we fix a business entity for them, and they didn't realize that at the state level, when you set up an entity through the state website, at least in the state of Utah, it asks for a lot of information that actually isn't required. So you divulge a lot of personal and private information to them that they store in their database, so that if somebody's looking for it, they know where to go find it. But if you look at the laws and find out what is the necessary, like the bare minimum necessary requirements in terms of personal information that I have to share with the state, it's actually very limited. So when I file an entity with the state, I only provide that information that is required, because why give the public a bunch of information that they don't need if I want to have some privacy, right? So sometimes entities are set up where they're manager managed LLCs versus a member managed LLC. And then at that point, they don't realize it, but they have 3 partners in the LLC, and now they go to close and all 3 of them have to show up at every closing because they didn't know how to set it up, otherwise. And so the other managers or working professionals or other individuals are like, really, every time you close on a deal or you want to be a wholesaler, like all 3 of us have to sign the contract? That starts to become pretty problematic. So It's just kind of what you pay, like what you get when you don't know. And sometimes for people, it's just like the value of their time. Is it worth like trying to research what you can and can't do? This last week, a lady called me. She's like, I don't think that I can set up an LLC with this name. I have to set up a DBA with it too because it doesn't have this and this in the name. And I listened to her and I'm like, no, none of that is accurate. You know, and so, but how much time did she spend, trying to research that stuff and figure those things out instead of looking for deals or closing on the next transaction? So sometimes it's a matter of like, where's your time best spent? And at the end of the day, just to know, like, it got done by somebody who has done this a lot of times and has set it up the right way. So.
And another thing to add on is with the privacy, like the number 4 reason. So I do a lot of driving for dollars, and so I'm looking for, abandoned homes, and a lot of these are owned in LLCs. I know to look up the registered agent, and 90% of the time, it's the owner is the registered agent. And so, but when I get to a registered agent as an attorney office, I know I'm never going to hold this person ever.
Right.
I'll call the attorney office and like say, can you leave a message to this person, to the owner? And then I'm sure they never do, but maybe they do. I don't know. But I never get back anything. So
I don't know. Cody can answer that. Do they, Cody?
Yeah.
That depends on how serious that, what my client has expected me to do as a registered agent. But certainly you can get a lot of mail as a registered agent that's totally junk mail. So unless my client says, hey, I want everything, then, as a registered agent, we can basically pass on all the things that are legal requirements or entity renewal stuff, but it's the solicitation stuff. My clients like pitch anything that's a solicitation. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, I mean, even I've called the attorney's office, like, can you leave a message or, tell them I want to buy their house, and it never leads anywhere. And not surprising. So having even the attorney office as a registered agent is a big roadblock for privacy wise. Like I can't find out who these people are. Like it's a dead end road. And
would it help like to have, let's say Cody is representing you and you're trying to get a hold of a property, you're like, that's going to make me a lot of money. And you say, hey, Cody, do you think you as an attorney can go call your little buddy attorney over there? Would they take it more seriously?
Good question.
Yeah, probably not, honestly. I wish that I could just like flex my guns and be like, hey, I'm an attorney, send me your stuff. They look at it and still be like, dude, that's a solicitation. I don't care how cool you think you are, what your title is. Yeah.
I thought there was like a secret handshake or, something that.
Yeah. So
like 3 seconds, Janice. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I wish that I had that kind of prowess, but I don't. But like the, some of that kind of stuff, you don't find out who the owners are without like a subpoena, right? Without like a court ordered, like you have to turn over who the owners are in this LLC. And so that's why it creates that kind of layer of privacy. Jared, to make it even, if those who are interested in the asset protection side, if you come across a property that has a trust as the owners of the property, a trust isn't registered even with the state. And so a beneficiary of a trust, we're getting kind of into the more complex stuff, but just because it's fun for a second to tease with people, the trust can actually own title, and the name of the trustee could be listed, but they might be hard to find. And then from an asset protection standpoint, the LLC can be the beneficiary of a trust. So we talked about, hey, creative ways to do this. We have the asset protection of the LLC, but we have the privacy that a trust can provide. And it's really, I was even trying to find, there's a vacant property that was pretty close to my house up in Utah. I drove by it all the time. I was driving for dollars, right? And now trying to find some vacant property. And it's been vacant for a long time. It was a really cool property had tons of potential. And I was looking it up and I could find just the name of the trustee was all I could get. And then I started Facebook stalking and everything else. Like, how do I track down who this individual is and paying private investigators? Or, at that point, it's really hard. It's really hard to find out, where do I track these people down? I sent them mail. I sent them multiple letters to the tax address and, any place I could, and got no responses. So, so it's definitely, it works. It definitely works to hide some stuff that way. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and what I've seen, because I'm like hundreds and hundreds of vacant properties I've looked at, and 90% of the ones that are in LLCs, they have they're themselves as a registered agent, so they're super easy to contact. But the ones that are the other 10%, I'm just like, I'm like, okay, they're done. I can't do anything after this.
Yeah. Yep. Hit the end of the road, right? The roadblock.
Dead end, for sure.
Okay.
And so, for somebody that has created an LLC through whatever different by themselves or through a CPA or, friend's mom or whoever created the LLC, is it hard for you to look those over and fix and make sure that those are, that they do have protection, or what can somebody do?
Yeah, best thing to do, if they have that set up, like that's what that one lady reached out to me this last week. She's like, "Hey, this person set up an entity for me. We had just done a kind of a presentation similar to this," and she reached out and just said, I just have this feeling like that it wasn't, it wasn't an attorney, and you brought up a bunch of issues, and I just don't know if it was set up right." And so I said, send me your documents and I'll take a quick look. And I think I probably spent, 10 minutes, and then just emailed her back and said, "Here's what you have that's good. These are 3 or 4 things that I need to check off, and those are checked off and good. And then like, here's the things that you're missing, and here's what it would cost to get it fixed." And so it didn't take, and I didn't charge her. I just said, "Hey, here's what's good. Like you're safe in these areas, and then here's what you need to do to get it fixed if you want to." And that way, it's balls are back in her court if she wants to spend the money. Yeah. Whether she knows what's fully at risk, but I try to explain quickly, like, hey, without this, you don't really have a completed LLC, and it's $500 to get it fixed, and then you can decide when it makes sense.
Yeah.
So where are you licensed, Cody? Are you just strictly in Utah?
So I'm actually licensed in Arizona and Utah. I have an office in Arizona and an office in Utah. I set up entities in lots of different states. I can't really solicit or market, my services in other states, but I have a bunch of clients that, I had one client actually that had rental properties in like 10 different states, and I ended up setting up LLCs in all 10 different states. So, I can work for people in a variety of different states on that front.
Oh, so you don't need to have an attorney that's licensed in that individual state to create those documents.
Yeah, not necessarily. Jared, what state was that? We set up a couple entities for you in Oklahoma.
It was in Oklahoma, yeah.
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 So
it was, I had a three mobile home parks were set up LLCs on, and then, well, the deal kind of went sideways, so we botched the whole thing, but still, he was able to get the process going before we had to.
Yeah, and we tried to not put the cart before the horse, right? We did kind of a minimal filing, like what's the bare minimum that has to be done, so we can actually close the name of LLC. And if we get to the next phase, then let's finish the rest of it. So I think I'm trying to think of states where I haven't set up entities in, but I've set up entities in a lot of states at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Perfect. I mean, I could go on and on. I have.
I know.
We're just scratching the surface, of fun stuff we could chat about. But
where can someone get a hold of you? So if they need help in LLC or questions, I mean, where's a good contact information for you? So
a couple different places. The best place to catch me, my law firm is Allies Law. And that's spelled ALYZE. AlliesLaw.com is our website. And we've got a couple different things on there. Contact us page. You can actually schedule a consult right through our website. We have even kind of like a text platform there where you can actually text over questions from there. If it's like texting for a legal question, obviously I can't respond back with legal answers there, or that comes through, but at least can be kind of to set up an appointment or to get an idea of what somebody's looking for. But the best thing to do is we have our schedule consult link there, and people can just schedule a time for their 20-minute, like a free 20-minute consult, and goes right on their calendar, right on my calendar, and then I just call them. That's the best way to just kind of hammer out some details and really be able to determine if we're a good fit for what the client needs or what we are looking for, and then jump in or not. So that's kind of the best way to find us. We have a Facebook page that's the same, Allies Law, and working on kind of. We're working on a YouTube channel. No TikTok. Dang, I gotta get up to speed on that stuff. YouTube channel we have, but we don't have anything there. So we're just working out some of the content right now on some of those places, but we'll start putting that stuff.
Yeah. We'll have that contact information in the show notes too for all their listeners and watchers.
Okay.
Beautiful. Awesome. Cody, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, you're a super busy guy, and thank you for giving us scratching the surface as far as LLCs and kind of trying to protect ourselves and things like that. So this has been a tremendous pleasure having you on. I mean, whenever it says they need a lawyer, I'm like Cody Backus. I don't care. I mean, even without us guys are like, oh, well, we should do a market. We should go to this other guy. No, just go to Backus.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been great to be on. I love to share when I get an opportunity to help and share some information. It's always fun. It's energizing for me. So I appreciate inviting me. No doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I learned a lot, and I'll definitely be calling you later.
Okay, sounds good. Looking forward to it.
Retainer fee here in a second.
Yeah. Pony up. Yeah, thank you. It's good seeing both of you and chatting with both of you. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. As far as our listeners go, I mean, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to this in any of our Facebook or our podcast formats, make sure to like and give us the highest rating and share as well. Helps out the channel a lot. We appreciate you guys. We love you.
Perfect. Bye.
See you guys.
We hope you liked that podcast. Stay tuned for next Monday for a brand new podcast and a brand new guest. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share.